Okay, שבוע טוב, בוקר טוב. The שיעור is dedicated לעילוי נשמת רפאל משה בן אליהו זיכרונו לברכה. Our hero for today is Rabbi Moshe Shick, the Maharam Shick, an extremely important figure. Many times we have said that there are two ways in which one can become important in our shiurim. One is that he is a prominent Torah figure, and the other is that he is a founder of a new way, a new derech for Orthodoxy, for Torah Judaism. And many times there is someone combining both. And the Maharam Shick is both a very prominent Torah scholar, is the leading halachic authority of his generation in Hungary, which is maybe the leading or one of the leading countries in which authentic Torah Yahadut is still vibing in the 19th century, is not dying out. They are in a very bitter war, a very bitter fight, but there is something very viable and very much alive in the Yahadut in Hungary in 19th century. And the Maharam Shick is leading the charge. And also is in many ways can be seen as one of the great, maybe not the only, but one of the greatest designers or architects of what is today called Chareidi way. Is in many ways is a prominent figure in this development. So is a very interesting and important figure to speak about. He was born, Rabbi Moshe was born in 1807 to a family. His mother came from more of Torah scholar family, but to be honest, from all the stories I understand that this time we are not speaking about a family in which you must be a Torah, a rabbi. So when they speak about his yichus, everyone must have an yichus, right? Otherwise, how can he become such a great rabbi? So he must have an yichus. So they speak about him coming from the Tosfot Yom Tov. Well, when you have to go back in time 400 years, then you know that not much have happened in between. Okay, so he's born to Yosef and Rivka. So his mother came from the Frenkel family, which was somewhat of a more famous family. He was born in Birkenhain. Birkenhain, that's the Hungarian name. Nowadays, and also he called that Brezova. Brezova is the Slovakian name. And nowadays it's part of Slovakia. Now, the name Shick is an interesting name. It's Shin Yud Kuf, Shick, Shin Yud Kuf, and it's a Rashi Tevot. It's acronym, and it means, that's how he explained it, Shem Israel Kodesh. So he explained that 100 years before his birth, when the Jews were forced, together with the other residents of the area, to take last names. You know that Adam Arishon was not created with a last name. First names were given very early in history, but last names, that's a very modern convention. And when the people in the area had to take a name, most of them, as I guess you know, took non-necessarily Jewish names. Right? So many, if I can just look around, right? Our names are not necessarily in Hebrew or in any Jewish language. Some of them are Yiddish, which can be considered a Jewish language. But many of them are just not. And is one of his grandfathers, when was given the choice to take a last name, he didn't want to take a name that is not in Hebrew. On the other hand, I guess the official from the interior, just didn't let him use any other name which is not a proper Hungarian name. So he took the word Shick, which has some Hungarian sound to it, but what he really meant to say was Shem Israel Kodesh. The name of the Jews is holy, which is a very interesting way to interpret his name. As a side note, he would later in his life write a very long and interesting tshuva about, are you allowed to call your child in a non-Jewish name? And spoiler alert, his answer is going to be in the negative, right? He's going to say, no, you are not allowed. And Shem Israel Kodesh. It is very important to call your children in Jewish names. And he was very much opposed to non-Jewish names, at least for boys. It seems that there have been different standards for boys and girls in this regard. It does not say anything about it in the Tshuva. But just from reading about his own biography and the people around him, it doesn't seem that they were bothered by giving, at least what to me sounds like a non-Jewish names for their girls, but they were very bothered with giving Jewish names to their boys. So that's an interesting side note stemming from this name, last name, Shick. Anyhow, his father passed away when he was 6. Now here, it's very interesting. If you just read his biography, it is clear that as anyone else we are speaking about, he was recognized as a genius in a very early age, and in the age, I mean, when he was 11, he went away to learn in the yeshiva of his uncle, and when he was 14, he went to the yeshiva of the Sopher. We'll tell the story later, but just the yeshiva of the Sopher usually began from the age of 16 or 18. So obviously we are speaking about someone which is much, much ahead of his age. Nonetheless, he, quoted by his son-in-law, he said to his son-in-law that as a boy, he was very difficult in understanding. And as a matter of fact, he said to him, there is an interesting midrash saying that when someone comes to heaven and he's being asked, why didn't you learn Torah as you should have? So let's say he says, you know, I was so poor, I didn't have the time, I needed always to support my family. So he would be shown Rabbi Akiva, who was as poor as a man can be, and nonetheless he was learning Torah. And if you would say, you know, I didn't have time, I was so rich, I had so many sheep to take care of, then he would be shown Rabban Gamliel, that was so rich, and nonetheless he was learning Torah, etc., etc., etc. So our hero, Rabbi Moshe Shick, said when someone would come to heaven and he would be asked, why didn't you then learn Torah properly? And you say, oh, because I was not so smart. I just didn't have the brains. So he would be shown me, said Rabbi Moshe Shick. And if Rabbi Moshe Shick could have done it, you could also have done it. So he presented himself as being very slow in understanding. Now, my suspicion is that his slowness in understanding was that when at the age of 6, he was presented with a sugya in Baba Kama, he was not able to grasp it in the first attempt. But because it's very difficult. Be it as it may, it is clear that his midah, the character that he felt that he really worked hard to achieve and that he wanted to transmit to his students and to his offsprings was not the character of just being a genius, but working hard, toiling. That's why I told the story. He said, I had difficulties in understanding. I didn't give up. I continued to toil. So according to the story, he told to his son-in-law that really I didn't stand the chance to learn Torah, but God had mercy on me because he saw how much am I working my head off. So he said, okay, let him be. And that's how I began to understand. So again, that's the story. Judging by his drashot and by his responsa and by everything that people felt around him, it doesn't seem that he was someone with a slow understanding. But again, it's always a question of proportions and what do you, I guess, what do you compare yourself to? Be it as it may. As I said, he became an orphan in the age of 6 from his father, and in the age of 11, he went away to the yeshiva of his uncle. As I said, his mother came from some rabbinical family, so his uncle had a little yeshiva. He went to learn by his uncle, but obviously he was a genius, so his uncle was not enough. And in the age of 14, he was sent to Freshburg, to the big yeshiva, the great yeshiva of the great Sopher, about whom we spoke in some previous episode, I think almost a year ago, seven months ago. And he became very famous there. The Sopher at the beginning didn't want to accept him. Now, again, he didn't necessarily have the family connections, and he was very young. So as a Rosh Yeshiva, you don't want to take responsibility for someone that is very young and an orphan from his father, so who would take care of him? So we can easily understand. I think the Khatam Sofer was very careful, but he was, in the end, they were able to convince him that Moshe can take the test, and he took the exams, the exams, and passed through them with flying colors, as you can expect. And but the Khatam Sofer was worried about taking such a young child, so he decided that he would do the Shabbatot and Yamim Tovim by him. Because usually the students of the yeshiva would be just scattered around in the city by the Balei Batim and eat. The Khatam Sofer said, you would eat by me. So he became a very close student of the Khatam Sofer. According to one of the stories, there was once that he was sitting next to the Khatam Sofer. Now again, he was 14, 15, and he fell asleep, he went to drift, and his head fell on the shoulder of the Khatam Sofer. So the students felt that it's improper for this great rabbi, the Khatam Sofer, and here is a young drooling on him. So they wanted to move the child. And the Khatam Sofer told them, you know, even if you do not respect the child as a child, but nonetheless, he's a shelf full of books. It's like a Sefer Torah. Would you move a Sefer Torah? Don't move him. And that's how he has become to be known as a minor shelf, a minor Sefer Torah. And so obviously he was a very close student of the Khatam Sofer. Many of his responsa in his later years would be quoting the Khatam Sofer, and not quoting him from his farim, quoting him per time, quoting him from his discussions, verse to verse, exactly. And he was married at the age of 20, and at the age of 31, now I'm not sure, there is a gap here which I couldn't understand why it exists. Maybe I didn't check enough. There is some gap here. I mean, you would have expected it to happen earlier. Maybe wanted to stay more next to the Khatam Sofer and then next to his son, the Ktav Sofer. I'm not sure why, but only at the age of 31, which, again, it's a young age, but to become a rabbi of a small community, back then it was, many times it happened earlier. Anyhow, at the age of 31, he became the rabbi of a small community named Ya'רגin. Now, it is near Preshburg. Obviously, it was with the involvement of the Schreiber family, the Khatam Sofer and the Ktav Sofer, that he was appointed as a rabbi there. Now, it was a resort community. So, like a summer resort. So there were some Jews there throughout the year, but truly the action would take place in the summer months. Then many Jews would come, including the Khatam Sofer himself and his family, to the resorts there. There were bathhouses, and it was nice. I guess it was a nice place. Where was it? Ya'רגin, near Preshburg. It's Hungary, near Germany. And now again, the times were very, very difficult to Judaism, to Yahadut, and reform, which the Hungarian version was called Neology, which means new theology. So the Hungarian version of reform was putting steam very, very, very strongly, advancing, and as the Rav of the small community, he was like trying to fight it, and to speak with the young boys, and try to advance them. But to be honest, that was a place which was excellent for him to sit down and learn by himself, but it was not a place with any future for a Jewish leader of the magnitude that he was designed to become. He was giving his drasha there, very interestingly, in German, not in Yiddish, which is interesting for a person that would become later known as I said, as the ardent defender of traditionalism. But he felt and wrote about it. He was not shy. He wrote about it that he felt that if he really want to communicate with his congregants, he must speak with them in a language they understand. If we speak Yiddish with them, then they would understand only half. And also, Yiddish was looked down as a genre. I think we spoke about it. So it was really not appreciated. I think nowadays in the USA, they have the yeshivish, right? People speaking with very bad combination of English and Yiddish. So in some places it's a badge of honor, right? I am not modern. I am speaking in this strange version of English because I'm not part of what is going on around. So as I said, it's a badge of honor. But for many people, they wouldn't want even to listen to a shiur from such a guy because he's obviously not one of us. So the Khatam Sofer felt that if he want to speak especially with the young generation, but even with the older generation, he must speak in their language. You can say that maybe I'm doing that right now, right? So you must speak with people in their own language. And that's what he was doing there. He also had, again, very interestingly, he had a chumash with the Mendelssohn translation and commentary, what was called the Beur of Moshe Mendelssohn, which was very much in controversy in his lifetime, but especially afterwards, when the offspring of the shita, of the method of Mendelssohn became clear that it leads to assimilation. But he was using his chumash, and again, he was open about it. What is interesting, how do we know that? Because someone sent him a letter asking if it is correct that the Khatam Sofer took the chumash of Mendelssohn and threw it on the ground. That was the question that he was asked. Maybe someone knew that he's using the chumash and wanted to stach him by saying that his rabbi was not using. Okay, anyhow. So he got the question. He's always answering, sometimes very strongly, but always very respectedly. He's respecting the man that he's answering. So he's getting the question, saying thank you for your question, etc., etc., etc. You are asking a good question. And then he says, I can tell you exactly. The Khatam Sofer indeed didn't use the Beur of Mendelssohn. But I do use it because the Khatam Sofer didn't need it for his own city. But I think that for my city, I do need to use it again in order to better explain the Chumash in German, etc. And then he says, once the Khatam Sofer visited in Ya'רגin. And the Khatam Sofer minhag was that when he was saying a pasuk, he would never say it Baal Peh, orally, because there is an halacha that you must say psukim only, because it is written, it's a written Torah, you must say it from the written material. So he would always ask for Chumash. It was once that he was by me, and he wanted to give a drasha in the shul, and he asked for a Chumash, and the only Chumash I had was the Mendelssohn Chumash. So I knew that he wouldn't want to use it, so I didn't give it to him. And he had no choice, but he said the pasuk out orally. And then later on, the story got rolling that he didn't want to use the Chumash, and he threw it on the ground. So the whole thing is baloney. It never happened, and the Khatam Sofer wouldn't do it, because even that he maybe opposed the using of the Beu, he didn't think that it's an epikorsut, he didn't think it's a minute, he didn't think that you should throw it on the ground. There is psukim, there is the Shem Hashem, there you cannot throw a Chumash on the ground only because the Beu, the interpretation was written by someone that you do not like. And that's a chidush for many people. So it's a very interesting tshuva. We have a few more stories about incidents when the Khatam Sofer visited in Ya'רגin. So one story is here in source Aleph. So the Khatam Sofer came and Maran Zatzal here. That's from his I think it's from his grandson. Writing the story. So the Khatam Sofer is coming, and Rav Moshe Shick is giving a shi'ur in Ya'רגin. And when Rav Moshe Shick sees the Khatam Sofer entering the room, he says, I wouldn't give a shi'ur when my rabbi is coming. Please replace me, and you would give the shi'ur. And the Khatam Sofer refused out of kavod to the Maharam Shick. So the Maharam Shick said, okay, I would speak, but because the Khatam Sofer is here, I would only say chidushim I heard from him. And for an hour he went only saying chidushim he heard from the Khatam Sofer. When he finished, the Khatam Sofer said, many of these chidushim I myself couldn't remember that I have said. So that's one story. The other story is, again, the Khatam Sofer came, and it was a resort, so he didn't come with his own library. There were no cars back then, and there was no small Sefaria you can use from your smartphone. So the Khatam Sofer needed a Tur Beit Yosef. It's a certain halacha book, a Tur Beit Yosef. He sent to the house of the Maharam Shick to get the sefer. He sent a student. the student came, and the Maharam Shick said, what Simon does Khatam Sofer needs, or chapter, was giving the chapter, and he wrote down the chapter and set it to the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer sent the Talmid back and saying to him, you shouldn't have bothered so much, you could just given me the book, I would have given it to you in a day, you shouldn't have written down the whole thing. And the student came in, and the Maharam Shick told him, the truth is, I don't have the Sefer. I wrote it out of memory. So that's, again, it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. Okay, so that's the person that you're feeling. Now, again, so he said he had difficulties in his childhood. Okay, if he says, he says. But it seems that most of us would really aspire to have the difficulties that he had. But again, also we have to learn from him the importance of, he called it chazara, right, of learning again and again and again, because it doesn't come only from learning once. They say about Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, not Moshe Shick, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, they say that he once said that the Mishnah Brura is an extremely difficult book. He had to learn it 3 times. Okay, nothing more to add. So he was there in this small city, and he was there for 24 years, from the age of 31 to the age of 54. He opened the yeshiva there, which became an extremely successful yeshiva. They had in their prime, I think they had 800 students. 800 students. Obviously, it was more than what they had there in the whole city of Jews. So 800 students. But what he really became known for was his halachic, as I said, halachic status and his responsa, which we'll speak about in Mirza Hashem. I'm skipping. There is a drasha here in source bet. I'm skipping it right now. In source Gimel, you can see a letter. That is a letter that he wrote to the son of his rabbi, the Khatam Sofer. His son was called the Ktav Sofer. And let's read it. So source Gimel. Matmiya. So this is the title. Matmiya al Chachmei Yisrael. מדוע שותקים מלעשות תקנות ולגדור גדרים נגד הפריצים המהרסי יסודי הדת. So he's sitting there in the small city of יערגין, and he's writing a letter to the כתב סופר, which is the son of the Khatam Sofer, and by title, the leading authority of the Hungarian Jewry. He is the son of the Khatam Sofer, and he's a big Rosh Yeshiva, he's sitting in Freshburg, he's the head, you may say, of orthodoxy. Obviously, all this is anachronism. There is still no orthodoxy to speak about. But he is the leading rabbi by fame. People look up to him. And he says to him, איסור הרים שלום, התאוות גבעות עולם, להרב הגאון המפורסם, ערוגת הבושם, עמוד, it's honorary titles, נר ישראל, שושלת היוחסין, כבוד שם תפארתו, מורנו ורבינו הרב, אברהם שמואל בנימין נרו יאיר, אב בית דין ורם, בקהילת קודש פרשבורג, ישמרה, יגן עליה אל. Fine. Okay, so that's dear sir. פליאה דעת ממני נשגבה, לא אוכלה. He says, I cannot understand you. It doesn't say you. I cannot understand. מדוע חכמי וגאוני ישראל, העומדים לשם ולתהילה, so the wise, the גאונים of עם ישראל, which are known for fame and name, מחשים ועומדים מנגד ביום קרב. How can we all be quiet as the war had already begun? ביום שבות זרים חיל האמונה והיראה. The enemy is already taking in captive the faith and God fear. אויבי השם יערימו סוד. The enemies of God, they are having secret councils. שעיר אל שעיר קורא. So a demon calls to another demon. ואל אחיו יאמר חזק. And they embrace each other. לנתק מוסרות התורה. To cut, to undo the ties of Torah. והמזכירים את השם. So while they are grouping and in strengthening themselves and creating institutions, המזכירים את השם דומי להם. Meanwhile, we are being quiet. כאיש נדהם. We are amazed. We are just standing there with gaping. כגיבור לא יוכל להושיע. I were like a hero that cannot help. וכי כך עשו אבותינו בקום רשעים עלי הארץ. He says, look at our history. We didn't come from people who were afraid, who were frightened. כה עשו אבותינו לקותיים בימי בית שני. Look at the כותיים in the days of the second temple. They were people that were being converted to Judaism, but the conversion was not for real. And in the end, Chazal just pushed them away, declared them as non-Jews. End of story. It says that's what we did with the Kutiyim. ובימי רבן גמליאל, כשרבו אפיקורסים בישראל. So in the days of Rabban Gamliel, when there were many epicursim, what he really means is, of course, Christians. Right? So what did the Jews did? They threw them out. They made in the tefillah of laminim velamalshinim al tihei tikva. Everyone knew and knows today that the minim is the code name for Christians. And that's not the end of the story, because as a Christian, you couldn't come to shul anymore, because you would be cursing yourself. So Chazal, I guess you all know that the first Christians, almost all of them, 90%, came from Jews. That was a Jewish sect. And Chazal decided that because of their heresy, and because they rejected the mitzvot ha'ma'asiyot, the actual commandments, and because they rejected the authority of Chazal, of our sages, so they rejected them. They threw them out. What does it mean they threw them out? Anyone that wants to come back can come back. But as long as you remain who you are, then that's the end. וכזאת עשו רבותינו ז"ל אשר היו לפנינו, לקט הרעה שבתאי צבי. אם עכשיו, it says, and we do not have to go 2,000 years old. Only 200 years old, we had the Shabtai Tzvi controversy. And again, the Chachamim of the time, obviously it's somewhat of a gross explanation, but basically in the end of the story we've rejected the followers of Shabtai Tzvi and they Islamized. ועתה כי קמו אפיקורסים רבנים רעים. Now there are new epicursim, רבנים רעים. Now who are these bad rabbis that he's speaking about? Obviously these are the reforms. Right? So these are rabbis that had a convention, and we spoke about this convention a few times because it was a very important convention in Brunswick in 1844, and they declared themselves as exempt from many of the mitzvot, and you are allowed to marry a non-Jew, etc., etc., etc. And he says, so that's the end of the story of them. והתחברו ודיברו בתורה דופי תחת יופי. They connected with each other, and instead of speaking good things about the Torah, יופי, they said bad things, דופי. כאשר פרסמו וחקקו אבן בדפוס, פרטיקול. Right? He says they published their protocol, what we call today, right? The protocol of their discussions, the conclusion, על דברי חכמינו ז"ל ילעיזו, and they give bad name. Slander? What the name is? Slander, thank you. They slander the sages. וגם בתורת משה רבינו עליו השלום שמו יד. באיסורים חמורים איתה וכרת יקלו. ויאמרו לנגד הכל כי אין להם חלק בתורה. Look what these rabbis are doing. They are undoing the prohibitions. They are undoing the isurim. And they declare, we do not have a share in the Torah. ועתה איך נוכל לראות בתברה הזאת, אשר יסיתו וידיחו, ויציתו אש זרה, הקוצים האלו, בבני ציון, שארית ישראל. So how can we stand aside and be quiet when these people are setting the house of Israel in fire? Because they are publishing, they are being read. If we are quiet, that means that we agree that that's a legitimate opinion. ואם אמנם כוח ורשות החרם נוטל מטעם המלכות ירום מודו, he says we cannot excommunicate them. Why? The government doesn't allow. The government had stripped the Jewish community from their force to excommunicate. Earlier, when they were given emancipation, one of the conditions was that they are not allowed anymore to have this self-autonomy in which they punish each other. As excommunication is seen as a type of punishment, then it was taken away. You were not allowed as a rabbi to excommunicate. So he says, we cannot excommunicate them. מכל מקום, לא ידע, למה לא נפרסם האמת, מדינם של אנשים אלו לפי דת תורתנו הקדושה, כיוון שכפו בתורה ומן השמיים, בהרבה מעיקרי דת תורתנו, כאשר ידע זה הרבה מדבריהם, מספרי המינים, שזה, okay, we will not excommunicate, but let's publish, who are they? Let's publish, that everyone should know that they are not legitimate rabbis. They are people that are heretics. They do not believe in the oral Torah, and אם כן, הרי הם אינם יהודים וכגויים גמורים. He says very sharp words here. He says they are not Jews. They are like complete. They say that no goy can be a goy gamur. Only Jews can be a goy gamur. Right? A goy is stam a goy. But a Jew can be a goy gamur. So that's what he's saying here. So הרי הם אינם יהודים וכגויים גמורים, ורעים הם. They are much worse than the goyim. כמו שבר הרמב"ם בהרבה מקומות. Okay, and he continues, so he says, they cannot pasken, obviously, so they cannot be rabbis, they cannot pasken, they cannot teach the children of Am Yisrael. שחיטתם נבלה, their slaughtering should be pasul. פסולים לעדות, they cannot give testimony. ולדיינים, obviously they cannot be judges. And also their gitin וכידושין are non-veiled because they cannot be rabbanim. Now, is going with that somewhere, right? Because if the gitin and kiddushin are not good, then their communities, all of them are mamzeirim. So after you said that, the next step, you are not allowed to marry any one of these people communities. So here we have the first suggestion to the separation of communities, not in Germany, that's where Rabbi Shimshon Fali should do it in a very different way. If we would have time, so at the end of the shiur, I would maybe speak a few words about the difference, the similarities and the differences between the separation movement as it came to be in Hungary and as it came to be in Germany. But here is the first Hungarian steps towards complete separation to the point of not marrying, which to the best of my knowledge, Rabbi Shimshon Falish never suggested such a suggestion that you would not be allowed to marry anyone of the Reform community. But that's what he's saying here. ואם כן, כיוון שגויים גמורים הם, בנותיהם ובניהם אסורים לנו. So you are not allowed to marry their daughters and sons. והם בכלל יסיר את בנך. That's what the Torah says, that you're not allowed to marry a non-Jew. Why? Because he would carry you off, or your children off. וכל שכן באפיקורסים האלו, שיצאו מכלל הדת, וקיבצו ואספו להם כת בפני עצמם, ובגובה ליבם דיברו גם כמייני חליצה וגיטין לשנות ולהמיר טוב ורע. So they are changing the whole of faith, and גיטין are unveiled, and קידוש nothing. אם כן זרעם ספק ממזירים, ואין לנו להתערב עמהם, אפילו אם יחזרו בהם ויקבלו את דת האמת. He says because they are ממזירים. Now if you are just a heretic, then you can repent. But if you are a mamzer, that's a stamp that cannot be removed. That's the end. So if they are sfek mamzerim, even if they would repent, he says to his congregation, I mean, that's what he's suggesting here to the Ktav Sofer. That's not something that he published. That's a private letter to the Ktav Sofer. But what he says here is everyone that would walk into the Reform temple should know that his step in is a non-reversed step. It's irreversible. You cannot go back. There is no way back. That's what he's trying to do here. Obviously, he is setting himself for war, real war. You burn all bridges when you publish. If you publish such a psak, then there would be no modus vivendi, right? Because you are separating yourself off, cutting all ties completely. To the Ktav Sofer. The Ktav Sofer was the son of the Khatam Sofer and was accepted as the non-formal leader of the Hungarian rabbis. There is no answer we know about from the Ktav Sofer, and he didn't continue to push it in such severity. You would see he didn't back off a lot, but we know of no answer from the Ktav Sofer. The Ktav Sofer was... We can have a shiur about. I don't think that we would have, but maybe you should have a shiur about the Ktav Sofer. Extremely interesting person. He lived in that was a situation that you cannot really handle well. Because things are, what can you do if you are riding a carriage with two horses going in complete separate directions? What can you do? Really, what can you do? You can either choose one of the horses or stay on the carriage and see the whole thing fall apart. That was the choices that the Ktam Sofer was handed. And Eliyahu Hanavi himself, I don't think he would have been able to bring these people back at the stage that they were at. And so it was extremely difficult. Now, he tried his best not to burn all bridges. So he didn't answer the letter. Because what good would it do if you would argue it out with the Maharam Shick? It would not do any good. He doesn't want to publish such a psak, so he just quiet it down. So that was in 1844. Anyhow, there is a letter being published by the rabbis, by the Orthodox rabbis, in which they condemn the decisions taken by the convention in Brunswick, by this Neolog Reform Convention, but without really completely cutting all ties with them. This suggestion was not accepted. Now in 1860, after 24 years in, as I said, in Ya'רגin, in this small Ya'רגin, a small community, is getting an invitation to come to Hust. Now Hust is a city on the other side of Hungary. That is near Galicia. So he's given a suggestion, an invitation from them. Now it's a huge community, very different from the small and sleepy Ya'רגin. However, he doesn't know if he can live. He feels like he ran the show for 24 years, and he doesn't want to abandon his flock. So he's really torn. And we have a beautiful letter from one of his friend rabbis, that he was writing with, discussing this question. So in source Daled, הרבנים בזמן הזה, so that's the answer from Rabbi Israel David Margalies, right? So that's his friend sending to our hero and writing to him how he think he should, what he think he should do. הרבנים בזמן הזה באוברלנד, Hungary was divided between the Unterland. Unterland is like the lower land, and the Uberland, in the upper lands. So the Rabbanim in the Uberland, אשר יושבים בזמן הזה בהבנותינו הרבים, כמו שר צבא בחומת מבצר עיר קטנה, ואנשים במעט, וסובב אותה מלך זקן, ויצר הרע ושלוחיו. He says, in the Uberland, we are fighting almost a lost cause. Because it's like a general of an army that he's in his bastion, and he is besieged by the enemy, and he's trying just to keep, he cannot go to any attack, but at least to keep what he is commanding on. That's your situation, he says, in the Uberland, where you are now. You have a small post that you are trying to defend. However, so he says, חלילה לרב ההוא לשקר באמונתו. Now, it's a very difficult job, because you're on the defense. חס וחלילה, a Rav there should never lie, should never run from the war. גם אם יאבד כל הונו, בוז יבוז לו, וילחום נגד היצר ושלוחיו. You should do the best you can to keep the young generation in the fold. וגם אם לא יעלה בידו לגדל את בני הקהילה לתורה, and even if you'd lose the children of your community, יקבץ לו חיל ממקומות אחרים. So bring children from other communities and try to create a yeshiva, etc. ואת אשר יכוחו יעשה. But truth is, די לו שיזכה לגדל את בניו לתורה, שלא נלכדו חס וחלילה בחבלי הזמן. This is the sad reality. Truth is, if you're in the Uberland and you are a Rav, do the best to defend your outpost. But say thank you to God if you are able to save your own children, because even that is in doubt. The children of the very rabbi are in danger. Now, so as long as again, this is the army commander, right? So as long as the king sent you there, you shouldn't never abandon your guard. However, if the king tells you, I need you somewhere else, and he take you out from this outpost, and he gives you a much better position from which you would be able to do much more. אם אמנם מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא יקראו למקום אחר, יגלהו מבית האסורים, יושיב אותו למקום אחר, הכי יאמר, עוד אשב במאסר, עוד אלחו מלחמות היצר. Says, does it make any sense? You'd remain in this small, tiny place, and you'd say, no, I want to fight there. who you are fighting there, for what? אם אכבשהו, מה אכבוש ממנו זולת שערות הראש? You think you'd be able to conquer the enemy there, the Yetzer Hara? The only thing you'd be able to conquer is the hair of your head, which would come down. והוא יריק השפתו אליי, עד בלתי אוכל ליתן בחור לבנותיי. You wouldn't find, maybe your sons you would be able to raise to Torah. You would not be able to find a chatan to your daughter. Because he won't be able to raise him, right? So even a chatan to your daughter you won't have. ואנוכי יהיה קולע אל השערה. הזאתי שאלה או ספק? He finished the letter. He says, is that even a doubt? Of course you should move. Of course you should move. Never abandon your post, but if you are being given a post from which you can influence the whole war, you should go there. So that's very strong, and that was decisive. So he really decided that 24 years in this small place, Ya'רגin, he's living, he's making sure that they choose another rabbi who is Yireh Shamayim, etc., and he's leaving to Chust, to the Unterland, exactly, in 1861. So as I said, according to what we know from historical sources, he has 800 students coming with him from Ya'רגin to Host. Now, he was, as a rabbi, he was like very hands-on on everything. Although it was a very big community. He was, so for example, every Friday, every melamed of every cheder in the city, in Host, would have to come, they would have some Toranut, and he would come and he would ask questions to the children to see that the Limud, that the learning is being done well. He was very much into testing. That's also very interesting. In his yeshiva, there were exams every week. And they say that there was once that he would give a shi'ur, and once he gave a shi'ur on Shabbat. And then he was given an aliyah LaTorah. And the Gabbai, one of the children in the yeshiva, the boys in the yeshiva, so he gave him the aliyah, and then he did the Mishaberach. And he says, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu would be mevarech our Rabbi, Rav Moshe Shick, for not giving a test for the shi'ur that he gave us today. And Maharam Shick, never. And he did give him a test on that as well. So that's, it was very much, he said, if you are learning Torah, I want to see that what you are doing is making a difference. And also, it's clear that his personality and belief was in toiling, as in working hard, repeating again and again, remembering. So not just learning for the fun of it, but really remembering what you learned. So he gave it a lot of emphasis. So as I said, very much invested in chinuch. He understood that the key to everything, if you really want to be able to stand the test of time, then it's all about education. It's education, 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 anything else. I mean, if you do not give good education, all the drashot you would give in the world just would not work because you already lost them. You must work from the age of Efes, of 0, but of 3, and you have a cheder, and then another cheder, and then a yeshiva, and in Hungary it was very much developed. We speak very much about the yeshivot in Lithuania, which were also beautiful yeshivot, and not enough emphasis is being given to the yeshivot of Hungary, which stem from the yeshiva of the Preshburg, of the Khatam Sofar. He was a Talmid of the Khatam Sofar, so the yeshiva was more or less in the image of the yeshiva in Preshburg, but these are huge yeshivot, 800 students. It's a very big, even in our standards, in nowadays standards, it's very big. In their standards, it was huge, and it was not the only one. In 1862, a year after coming to Host, the world of Hungarian Jewry is going through a revolution. And that is because, as I said, the Hungarian gave civil rights to the Jews. But it came with a sting, as always. It came with a sting. And the thing was that they said to the Jews, now we want you to have like a congress. It was called the Jewish Congress. Have a congress. And all the Jews would come. And we want to know how you are going to educate the rabbis of the next generation. And we want to know what would be the form of the schools. What would be taught there? What is the program that you are going to teach there? And some other questions that they wanted to be answered. But so they had a vote. All the Hungarian Jews voted and sent emissaries to this parliament, right? This Jewish Congress. Beautiful. But it was rigged. Because the Hungarian government really didn't want, they gave civil rights to the Jews, not in order for them to continue to walk with their ridiculous clothing, right? They give the voting rights to the Jews because they believe that now they would become modernized. So the vote was rigged in a way that gave more. Think about the voting system in the US. So the question how you choose the districts and where you put the line many times can be the difference between blue and red. That was more or less the same system there. And if you give more power to the cities, then you have the more educated and modernized Jews. If you give more power to the rural areas, then you have more of the small C conservative Jews, the traditionalist Jews. The voting was rigged in a way that gave an out of proportion size to Neo-Lodge movement because they focused on the cities. So in this Congress, they had about 60-40%, 60%. Well, I'm speaking very, very roughly now, but 60% more or less were Neo-Lodge and 40% were traditionalists. Now, obviously, you had wings. So in the Neo-Logs, not everyone was in for canceling the whole thing. So there was the right wing of the Neologians and there was the left wing of the Orthodox. And there was some of these right and left wings hoped that they would be able to reach some modus vivendi, some decisions that would enable them to go and continue together. There is a book by Professor Yaakov Katz. Professor Yaakov Katz himself was a Hungarian-born Jew, and he became before the war, and he made Aliyah, and he became a history professor in Hebrew University. It was niftar, 30 years ago. And he wrote a sefer, a book. The book named in Hebrew is Hakera Shelo Nitacha. In English, they translate it as a divided house. So you already know what happened in this Congress. What happened was that they came together, and as happens sometimes, or maybe as happened frequently most of the times, the extremists from both sides were able to win the day. So the first choice they had to do is who would head the Congress, meaning who would be the president. Now it was clear because 60% were from the Reform, it was clear it would be someone from the Reformers. Now that was more or less agreed upon. But the Orthodox hoped that they would choose someone which is more traditionalist because as the head, you must have someone that is speaking to both camps. The Reforms didn't take it. They chose as the president one of the most staunch reform leaders, and also as the vice president. They took both positions, which usually is understood that if you have president and vice president, again, although by the force of majority, you can take both. But it seems as a fair game that the majority would take the president and leave for the minority the second position. They took both. Then the traditionalist responded by putting a motion that every decision of the Congress must adhere to the Shulchan Aruch and the Rema. That was rejected. And some of the moderate reforms still tried maybe to accept it and just to argue about what is considered as an halachic discussion. But the more left-wing didn't want to have anything to do with it, and they threw it out. When they threw it out, the traditionalists stood up on their feet, and they say, if you do not accept the yoke of the Shulchan Aruch, then what are we doing here? And they left. Now, it was a very risky move because it was against the government. The government ordered everyone to sit down. Now, here they speak about dictatorship. I'm not putting my position right now, but there it was a real dictatorship. If you are living a place that the government told you should be, that can be the last thing that you are doing in your life. But they felt they would be able to pull it off because they had connection. It's very, very interesting. As I said, it's a whole book. It's a very interesting story. They had connections with some of the opposition members in the Hungarian parliament. Now, the Hungarians themselves, because they just got their half freedom from the Austrians, they were very much into civil rights to everyone and being equal and not putting down their civilians. So they were able the Congress convened. There were almost only the Reform there and Rabbi Israel Ilzheimer, who Be'ezrat Hashem would speak about, a very interesting person, that he was a very Orthodox rabbi, also a student of the Khatam Sofar, but he believed that we need to carve some middle way. He was not successful because after all of the Orthodox left, he had no power, so they just did whatever they wanted, the reforms. And what the Orthodox were able to do, led by the Maharam Shick, was that they turned to the opposition members in the Hungarian parliament, and they said, if you force us to be with people that we are in we have different faith, it's a different religion, then you are violating our freedom of faith. And that was a sacred card in Hungarian of the time. So that bought them the ability, and the Caesar later make it official, that these are two different religions in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Hungary especially. You have, I think they called themselves the Mosaic religion, these were the neologists, and you had the Shulchan Aruch religion. I mean, there was no Jewish religion anymore, but there was the Mosaic religion and the Shulchan Aruch religion by the Orthodox. Now, that charge was led by the Maharam. Maharam Shick was there in the Congress, and later was basically pulling the strings behind the whole thing. So that was a big drama in Hungarian life, because from there on, what Maharam Shick was doing was saying, we need to have our own separate religion. And that goes hand in hand with what he sent to, if you remember, to the Ktav Sofer, years before. And that means, now, and here you should listen carefully because it's very important, he says, you cannot sit on the fence. You are either with them or you are with us, because it's a social question. It's a social question. It's not only an halachic question. If it was an halachic question, you can, if you are going by the Shulchan Aruch, then you are fine. But it's a social question. So if you do not join the Orthodox movement, and let's say that you also do not join the Neolog movement, you sit on the fence. The communities sitting on the fence were called the status quo communities, status quo status quo communities. And there were many important rabbis that didn't want, they said, we don't want to choose. I am the rabbi of my community. Everything is according to the Shulchan Aruch. I don't want to reject out-handed the people that are more left-wing in my community. We can sort it out. The Maharam Shick said you should be put under a ban because you are damaging the effort to rearrange Yahadut in a viable way. If it would go throughout your way, maybe you are holding. Next generation, it would collapse. We saw it in Germany. It won't stand. So we must take a step already now, when still most of the Jews are still observant. After they are not observant, after the horses are out of the stable, then that it does no good to close the stable. That's what happened to the Rasha. Right? When he was closing the stable, so to speak, he had, from the huge Germany, he had only a few hundred families. But in Hungary, most of the Jews are still observant. We can keep them. But we must put very strong barrier between us and them, and there is nothing in the middle. Now, again, this is a social choice. Not only it's very important. Now, obviously, it is guided by religious considerations. He saw it as halachically imperative that he needs to distance himself from them. But in the end, the act is a social act. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch himself was terrified when he learned that the Maharam Shick is excommunicating rabbis that are the status quo rabbis. He said, why? They are following the Shulchan Aruch. For Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, it was an ideological question. Do you adhere to the Shulchan Aruch or not? Are you halachic or not? If you are halachic, you are good. The title does not matter. He said it over and over again. The title does not matter. But for the Maharam Shick, the title was almost everything. Obviously, the title was important because it is keeping the content. But you must have the title. If you do not have the title, you are damaging the war effort. And because it's a war. It's a war. And that's how Hungarian Jewry was developing from there on. I don't know how can I stress enough the importance of this development, because that later was important both into the US and into Israel, and that's responsible. What we speak here now is not history. That's current events. And that's extremely important to understand how we came to where we are here today. So that was his position. Now again, obviously that's a position that came from pure heart, no question about it. And also, it worked. You cannot deny it. It worked. It worked very well even. But it came with great price. The great price is that you are not with me, you are not a Jew. That is the price. That means that you are completely, as I said earlier, if you step into the Reformed temple, that's the end of the story. And there are heartbreaking letters he got in his response from rabbis that were serving a certain community, and the community was going left, because that happened in many places. So the community was going left, and the rabbi was not able to convince the community to become an Orthodox community. So what can he do? There is one letter from a guy that is giving a shiur, he says, in a certain Beit Midrash, and the Beit Midrash is going left, and the guy says, I have a wife, I have 10 children, and I have no other parnasa. Won't you allow me to continue and give? I'm only giving their shiurim. The Maharam Shick said, you are not allowed to give the shiur, you should abandon your position, you should resign, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu would take care of your parnasa. He saw it as there is no other choice. By the way, Rav Soloveitchik, in the 30s, in America, he had an answer that if you're in Rosh Hashanah, in a certain place, there is only a Reformed temple with tkiyot. You are not allowed to go even behind the building in order to hear the tkiyah shofar. It's when you are at war, you are at war. The question is, should you wage war, which is a very important question. But if you're at war, then you cannot give in. Because if you would give in, everything would collapse. And no changes are allowed at all. No change in shul. Things that to us would look ridiculous. What they were fighting for. The bima should be here, or there are things that, okay, they are part of the traditional way shul is, but no one would say they are a deoraita or the rabbanan or anything. If a shul would change, I'm not speaking about the hate of the mechitza. I am speaking about the question of where is the table from where you read the Torah. He would throw you out of his Orthodox organization. That would be the end of it. So that's not simple. These are not simple matters. These are not simple matters. Now, there was one thing he had to give up. I said earlier that he was giving drashot in German. His friends in the new Orthodox Union in Hungary, they were not happy with that, because they felt that giving drashot in vernacular is part of the giving in to the new winds. And in the beginning, he tried to fight. I wouldn't read because our time is up, but you can see in source Hey and source Vav, he's trying to fight that. In the end, he says, although I think it's a mistake, because I don't see any problem with speaking in German, and the Sopher allowed me, and my Rabbi allowed me, etc., etc., etc. But because my friends think otherwise, and we're in a war, I must obey and accept the opinion of my friends. And that was the end. He didn't give drasha in Germany anymore. And not only didn't give drasha in German anymore, he didn't allow his students to give drasha in the vernacular anymore, although he thought that's the correct thing to do. Because again, when you are in war, you cannot deviate. You cannot be in offside. You must keep the line. Yeah, I continue again. There are many very interesting things to read here. He is the author of this slogan, almost. The word Chareidism is coming from the word Chared, fearful. Obviously, fearful of the word of God, which is a beautiful thing. He says to one of the status quo communities, trying to convince them to become Orthodox. Now, they are Orthodox in the meaning of they are observant, but he wants them under the Orthodox ban. And he says to them, aren't you fearful of what is going to happen? And he's repeating it again and again in different responses. He is in a stance of fear, of constant fear. Now, for a good reason, he is really being hunted. He's not paranoid. Maybe he is, but sometimes, even if you are paranoid, someone is out for you. And they were out for him. No question that. And he was fighting a war. He was fighting a godly war. But when you're fighting a war, there is, how they say, cultural damage? Collateral damage. And there was. Certainly there was. I want to finish. Again, there is a lot to speak about, but I want to finish with what I found in the introduction of his grandchild, which I think is so telling. It's so telling. I couldn't have written it better. Source state. It's in the third side. The last one. It says about his grandfather. הרבה יגם ועמל מרן זצ"ל לעצור בעד זרם הזמן. He says, our leader, our Rabbi, Maharam Shick, toiled and fought in order to stop the moving of time. That's an amazing, I think it's an amazing sentence. That's how they felt, that time is bringing with it dangers, not only dangers, destruction of authentic Judaism, of Torah Judaism, of observant Judaism, of service of God, and you have to fight time himself. Zeitgeist. You have to fight the time spirit itself. And you have to build walls, huge walls, so no wind of time would be able to find the crack in the walls and come in. גם מחוץ למדינה לחם את מלחמות הדת, בכל מקום אשר דבר השם הגיע. לבבו הטהור היה תמיד ער לצאת לקראת המערכה אשר כמעט, it says, his pure heart was always going, he was open in arms in order to go to war. ויצא כגיבור מנצח. He says, אשר כמעט בכל עלתה לו. It cost him almost everything. Because I'm sure this is a man who wanted to sit and teach Torah and learn Torah and give. That's what he wanted to do. And instead he found himself constantly in fight, in strife. ויצא כגיבור מנצח והציל אלפים ורבבות מישראל מרשת האפיקורסות. He says, but he won in the end. That's what his grandchild says. He won in the end because he saved thousands and tens of thousands from the epikoursos, from the reforms. Now, I'm not in any position, I say many times, we're speaking about people that are much higher than anything that I can speak about. Obviously, you are saying that he saved thousands or tens of thousands if you believe that without having the wars, everything would have been lost, which is obviously what he believed. So everyone that you can save is, you are saving him. You are not thinking about how many you lost, because they were lost anyway. That's the perception. הודות להשם כי פעולתו ועבודתו לא היה לריק, so he didn't work for nothing. ועד היום הזה אנו אוכלים פרי מעלליו ומפעליו. He says, to this day, we are eating from the fruits of his work, and we are, as I said, לטוב ולמוטב, in many ways. יהי זכר הצדיק לטובה, for sure. So may the memory of this tzaddik should be of blessed memory. And again, this is a man that you can agree or disagree, and obviously many of us came from how would they say, spiritual positions which are different from what he is standing for. We didn't live in the time and place that he was in, and if we would have been there, maybe it would have been much closer to what he is saying. But be it as it may, he is obviously standing for the pureness of the heart, for working hard for what you believe in, and for putting a line in the sand, which is sometimes the last stand. And I think that's again, we can argue one detail or the other, but you cannot but admire the work that the Maharam Shick had done. Thank you, and Bezrat Hashem continue next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.